Picture a bustling city, its streets alive with the hum of voices, its temples towering toward the sky, then, in the blink of history's eye, it's gone. Not just abandoned, not simply forgotten, but erased so completely that centuries later, we're left sifting through dust and legend, wondering what happened. This is the haunting reality of lost civilizations, societies that thrived, built empires, and then vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and riddles. From the fabled streets of Atlantis, swallowed by the sea, to the cryptic ruins of Cahokia, where a mighty mound-building culture simply walked away, these disappearances are more than historical footnotes, they're gripping mysteries that defy explanation. But what if I told you Atlantis is just the beginning? Beyond the familiar tales lie dozens of other enigmatic cultures, kingdoms that once glittered with gold, cities humming with innovation, peoples whose names we'll never know, all swallowed by time. Some collapsed overnight, victims of catastrophe or conquest. Others faded so slowly their own descendants forgot them. And then there are those that left no clue at all, as if they simply stepped off the stage of history. These aren't just stories, they're real, tangible puzzles etched into the earth itself, waiting for us to piece them together. That's where this journey begins. Over the next 30 stops, we'll traverse continents and centuries, unearthing civilizations so mysterious they make Atlantis look straightforward. You'll witness the eerie silence of Anka's overgrown temples, where an empire of millions melted into the jungle. You'll stand in the shadow of Great Zimbabwe's towering stone walls, built by a culture whose very identity remains debated. And you'll wander the sun-baked ruins of the Nabateans, who carved an entire city into rose-colored cliffs, only to vanish, leaving Petra as their only echo. This isn't just history, it's a detective story on a global scale, and by the end you'll see the past and our place in it with entirely new eyes. So let's begin where all great mysteries start, with a disappearance. Deep in the plains of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, a civilization once thrived with such sophistication it would rival any ancient power today. The Indus Valley people built cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa with an eerie precision, straight streets laid out in perfect grids, advanced drainage systems with covered sewers, even uniform brick sizes suggesting centralized planning. These weren't just settlements, they were metropolises of the Bronze Age, flourishing around 2600 BCE, while much of the world still lived in scattered villages. Then, around 1900 BCE, something went terribly wrong. The evidence shows homes abandoned in haste, unfinished tools left in workshops, meals still in cooking pots. But here's the mystery: no signs of war, no mass graves, no towering walls breached by invaders, just silence. Archaeologists have sifted through the layers and found only clues that deepen the puzzle. Some point to climate shifts, shifting river patterns that turned fertile lands to dust, perhaps. Others whisper of the Aryan migration theory, that newcomers from the north might have disrupted trade or brought new ideologies. But here's the haunting detail: even if outsiders arrived, there's no smoke-blackened rubble, no broken weapons in the streets. The artifacts tell their own cryptic tale. A single seal depicting a figure seated in yogic meditation, surrounded by animals. Could this be an early proto-Shiva, hinting at cultural continuity? Or those tiny, carefully carved stone weights, so standardized they suggest a society obsessed with fairness in trade. Yet nowhere do we find grand temples or palaces, no colossal statues of kings. This was a civilization that valued order and cleanliness, then walked away from it all without leaving so much as a written explanation. Their script remains undeciphered, a language of 400 symbols scratched onto seals and pottery, taunting us from across the millennia. What's most unsettling isn't just their disappearance, it's how advanced they were and how little we truly understand. While Egypt built pyramids and Mesopotamia erected ziggurats, the Indus Valley people engineered something arguably more modern. a society where every house had access to clean water, where waste flowed through meticulously designed channels, where urban planning seemed almost democratic. And then, like a carefully drawn map left blowing in the wind, it simply faded away. The cities didn't burn, they were emptied, as if the people had somewhere else to be. Today, their ruins whisper not of conquest, but of choices made in the shadow of some invisible crisis. A lesson in how even the most organized civilizations can unravel when the world around them shifts. On the island of Crete, a civilization once bloomed with such vibrancy that its influence stretched across the ancient Mediterranean. The Minoans, named after the legendary King Minos, built sprawling palace complexes like Knossos, where vivid frescoes of leaping dolphins and bull dancers still cling to the walls, ghostly echoes of a culture that celebrated beauty, sport, and the sea. Their society was a marvel of its time, multi-story buildings with advanced ventilation, intricate plumbing systems, and storerooms overflowing with olive oil, wine, and saffron. This wasn't just a kingdom, it was a maritime superpower, its ships weaving trade networks from Egypt to Anatolia. Then, around 1600 BC, disaster struck. The volcano on Thera, modern Santorini, erupted with a force estimated to be 4 times stronger than Krakatoa. The blast sent tsunamis racing across the Aegean, swallowing coastal settlements whole. Ash blotted out the sun for years, crippling agriculture. But here's the twist: the Minoans didn't vanish overnight. Their palaces show signs of rebuilding, even renewed grandeur, before finally falling silent. So what finished them? Some point to Mycenaean invaders from mainland Greece, who may have taken advantage of their weakened state. Others suggest internal collapse, trade routes severed, resources depleted, a society unraveling under the weight of ecological catastrophe. The silence of their language, Linear A, only deepens the mystery. Unlike its deciphered successor, Linear B, these symbols, etched onto clay tablets for inventories and rituals, remain defiantly unreadable. Were they prayers, poetry, records of a lost worldview? Even their art taunts us with unanswered questions. Why frescoes of bare-breasted priestesses clutching snakes? What secrets lay behind the labyrinthine corridors of Knossos, inspiring the myth of the Minotaur? Most haunting is what they left behind. No grand tombs of warrior kings, no epic tales of conquest. Just delicate gold bead pendants, frescoes of boys somersaulting over bulls, and the faint scent of saffron lingering in empty storerooms. The Minoans didn't just disappear, they left a puzzle wrapped in beauty, a reminder that even the most brilliant civilizations can be erased by the whims of earth and sea. In the steamy jungles of what is now southern Mexico, a civilization emerged so influential that scholars call it the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs. Flourishing from around 1200 to 400 BC, they built not just cities but an entire cultural blueprint that would later shape the Maya and Aztecs. Their most iconic legacy, those haunting colossal heads, giant stone portraits weighing up to 50 tons, carved from single basalt boulders hauled over 80 kilometers without wheeled carts or draft animals. Each face is unique, with thick lips, flattened noses, and helmets that suggest these were portraits of powerful rulers. But here's what's staggering. The Olmecs achieved this at the dawn of Mesoamerican civilization, with no precedent to guide them. Their cities, like La Venta and San Lorenzo, reveal a society obsessed with ritual and cosmic order. Pyramids aligned with celestial events, jade artifacts traded across vast distances, and rubber balls used in a sacred sport that may have ended in human sacrifice. The Olmecs even developed one of the earliest writing systems in the Americas, a series of glyphs scratched onto jade and serpentine that hint at a complex mythology. Yet by 400 BC, their heartland was abandoned. Not slowly, not in phases, but abruptly. At La Venta, archaeologists found evidence of deliberate destruction, monuments toppled, altars smashed, sculptures buried in neat rows as if part of a solemn farewell ceremony. What could have shattered such a foundational society? Some point to environmental catastrophe. Core samples from nearby lakes show drastic drops in rainfall around the time of their collapse, suggesting prolonged droughts that crippled agriculture. Others argue for internal revolt. The colossal heads, symbols of elite power, may have become targets of a rebellion against ruling classes. There's even a theory that shifting trade routes as newer cultures rose left the Olmecs economically isolated. The truth might be all three. A society buckling under ecological stress, fractured by inequality, then finished off by dwindling resources, but the most tantalizing clue lies in what survived them. The Maya's sacred calendar, the Aztecs' feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, even the ritual ball game, all have roots in Olmec tradition. They didn't so much vanish as dissolve into the bloodstream of later civilizations, their identity fading even as their ideas endured. Today, their colossal heads stare blankly from the jungle, silent witnesses to a paradox: how a culture so foundational could leave so few answers about its own end. Carved into the rose-red cliffs of Jordan's desert, the city of Petra stands as a breathtaking monument to a people who mastered the impossible, the Nabateans. These nomadic traders turned empire builders didn't just survive in the arid wilderness. They thrived, transforming barren trade routes into a web of wealth and influence stretching from Arabia to the Mediterranean. At its peak, Petra wasn't merely a city. It was a desert mirage made real, where waterfalls cascaded down palace facades and gardens bloomed in the heart of the dunes. Their secret, an engineering marvel, a network of dams, cisterns, and ceramic pipes so precise it could channel every scarce drop of rainwater into a lifeline for thousands. But the Nabateans were more than just brilliant hydrologists. They were cultural chameleons, absorbing and remixing influences from every caravan that passed through. Walk through Petra's ruins today, and you'll see Greek-style columns beside Egyptian-inspired carvings, all rendered with a distinctive Nabatean flair. Even their language evolved, borrowing Aramaic script while retaining its unique cadence. This adaptability made them indispensable middlemen until it became their undoing. As Rome's hunger for Eastern luxuries grew, the empire set its sights on Nabatean trade networks. In 106 CE, Emperor Trajan annexed their kingdom with startling ease. No epic battles, no last stands, just a quiet surrender, as if the Nabateans saw resistance as futile. What's most haunting isn't their political collapse, but how completely their identity dissolved. Unlike other conquered peoples who rebelled or preserved their traditions, the Nabateans seemed to embrace Roman rule. Their water systems still functioned, their cities still bustled, but their art lost its edge, their language faded, even their gods were gradually renamed to suit Roman taste. By the 4th century CE, a people who had etched their greatness into stone were reduced to a footnote in Roman tax records. Yet Petra's silence speaks volumes. Those intricate water channels, still visible today, hint at a civilization that outsmarted the desert but couldn't outrun the tide of history. Perhaps their greatest strength, adaptability, became their fatal weakness as they traded cultural survival for economic survival. The cliffs still bear their handiwork, but the Nabateans themselves slipped away, leaving behind a city that feels less like a ruin and more like a mirage vanishing in the midday sun. Rising from the dense jungles of Cambodia like a mirage of stone, Angkor Wat stands as the largest religious monument ever built, an architectural love letter to the Hindu god Vishnu, later transformed into a Buddhist shrine. But this sprawling temple complex was just the glittering heart of something far grander, the Khmer Empire, a civilization that ruled Southeast Asia for 6 centuries. At its height in the 1200s, the empire's capital, Angkor, was a metropolis of nearly 1 million people, a hydraulic marvel where canals, reservoirs, and rice paddies stretched across an area the size of modern-day Los Angeles. The Khmers didn't just conquer nature, they orchestrated it, turning monsoon floods into a life-giving symphony with their vast barrays or reservoirs. Yet by the 1500s, this powerhouse had crumbled. The jungle swallowed its towers and its people scattered. For years, scholars blamed Siamese invaders, the kingdom of Thera, whose armies sacked Angkor in 1431. But LiDAR technology has peeled back the forest canopy, revealing a darker truth. The scans show a city already in decline centuries before the Siamese arrived. The real culprit, a climate catastrophe. Tree ring data from Vietnam tells a grim story. Decades of erratic monsoons, punctuated by brutal droughts in the 1300s. The Khmer's intricate water network, their greatest strength, became their fatal flaw. When the rains failed, their reservoirs turned to cracked mud, rice harvests collapsed, and social order frayed under the weight of hunger. The LiDAR maps expose haunting details: canals silted up, neighborhoods abandoned mid-construction, even evidence of desperate attempts to dig smaller, localized ponds as the Grand Barriers dried. And here's the twist: the Khmers didn't vanish, they adapted. Inscriptions tell of kings relocating to Phnom Penh, trading stone temples for stilt houses along the Mekong. The empire didn't fall, it transformed, shedding its monumental skin to survive. Angkor's silent stones whisper a warning: even the mightiest civilizations are hostages to the sky. The jungle didn't conquer the Khmers, it simply waited for the water to run out. Isolated in the vast expanse of the Pacific, Easter Island's moai statues stand like silent giants, their hollow eyes staring not at a civilization that destroyed itself, but at a far darker truth. For decades, the story of the Rapa Nui people has been twisted into a cautionary tale of ecocide, a society so reckless it chopped down every last palm tree, triggering collapse. But modern archaeology paints a different picture, one where blame lies not with the islanders, but with the shadows of ships appearing on the horizon. The evidence starts with the trees. Pollen samples reveal the island's forests did dwindle, but not from mindless overharvesting. The Rapa Nui were master adapters. They transformed the landscape intentionally, using rock gardens to boost soil fertility and carving ingenious pits to protect saplings from wind. Those iconic moai, moving them didn't require rolling logs as once assumed. Experiments show teams could walk the statues upright with ropes, a technique that needed far fewer resources. And here's the clincher: deforestation peaked around 1600, but the society thrived for another century, developing intricate clan systems and even shifting to smaller, more sustainable moai. The real rupture came in the 1700s when European whalers and slavers descended. Journals from Dutch explorers in 1722 describe a populous island with thriving villages. By 1862, Peruvian slave raids had kidnapped nearly half the population, including elders who held ancestral knowledge. Diseases like smallpox ravaged the survivors. Missionaries burned rongorongo tablets, the island's only written records, calling them pagan. In just decades, a complex culture was dismantled by violence and disease, not ecological folly. Even the moai tell this story. Many were deliberately toppled face down, not by environmental despair, but during violent internal conflicts sparked by European-introduced destabilization. The Rapa Nui didn't vanish, they were shattered. Their tragedy isn't a parable about environmental ruin, and it's a stark reminder of how quickly outside forces can unravel even the most resilient societies. The statues still stand today, not as tombstones for a foolish people, but as witnesses to a civilization that endured far longer than myths would have us believe. 7,000 years ago, while much of Europe was still dotted with small hunter-gatherer camps, the Cucuteni Tripilia culture was doing something extraordinary, building sprawling proto-cities that dwarfed anything else on the continent. Stretching across modern-day Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, their settlements housed up to 20,000 people, with concentric rings of houses radiating outward like a Neolithic spiderweb. These weren't just clusters of huts, they were meticulously planned communities, their homes filled with intricate pottery painted in spirals and serpent motifs, their ovens yielding some of the oldest evidence of baked bread in human history. Then, like clockwork, every 60 to 80 years, the inhabitants would do the unthinkable, set their entire village ablaze in a controlled inferno. Archaeologists find layers of ash and charred wheat, yet no signs of violence or panicked flight. Instead, the burned ruins show eerie precision. Valuable objects removed, doors and windows deliberately sealed before ignition. It's as if the fires were part of a sacred cycle, a ritual rebirth rather than disaster. Some researchers believe these burnings were tied to generational turnover, a way to purify the space for new beginnings. Others point to the eerie uniformity of the home's standardized sizes, identical layouts suggesting a society that resisted hierarchy until collective pressures became unsustainable. The real mystery isn't why they burned their settlements, but why they stopped. Around 3500 BC, the cycle of construction and fire ceased abruptly. The last villages show signs of strain, smaller, less organized, with cruder pottery. Climate data reveals a punishing shift: colder, drier conditions that would have devastated their wheat-dependent agriculture. Yet here's the twist: unlike other collapsed civilizations, the Cucuteni Tripilia didn't vanish into chaos. Their cultural fingerprints linger in later Balkan cultures, from weaving patterns to goddess figurines. It's as if they didn't so much disappear as dissolve, their way of life hitting a ceiling that not even fire could cleanse. What lingers most hauntingly are those spiral motifs, identical across centuries of pottery. They mirror the layout of the settlements themselves: concentric circles radiating outward, then collapsing inward in flames, a society caught in a loop, building and burning until the world outside grew too harsh to sustain the cycle. Their legacy whispers a provocative question: did they foresee their own limits, choosing ritualized endings over slow decay? The ashes hold no answer, only the faint imprint of thousands of footsteps walking away. Along the stark northern coast of Peru, where desert meets ocean, the Moai civilization built towering adobe pyramids painted in vibrant murals, a society that thrived for 7 centuries, mastering irrigation in one of Earth's driest landscapes. Their temples, like the Huaca del Sol and Huaca de la Luna, rose like giants from the sand, adorned with fanged deities and scenes of ritual combat. The Moai weren't just builders, they were storytellers in clay, crafting pottery so detailed it depicts everything from spinal surgeries to hallucinogenic rituals. Then, around 600 CE, their world unraveled in a cascade of mud and desperation. The culprit, El Niño on a catastrophic scale. Sediment cores from the region tell a grim tale, layers of flood debris sandwiched between centuries of dry soil. These weren't just heavy rains, they were biblical deluges washing away canals, drowning fields in silt, and collapsing adobe walls into rivers of muck. But what's chilling isn't just the destruction, it's how the Moai responded. In their final days, their art took a dark turn. Murals at Huaca de la Luna show prisoners marched to temple tops, their throats slit as offerings to angry gods. Skeletal remains found nearby have cut marks consistent with ritual sacrifice, some still wearing copper masks pressed onto decomposing faces. Yet here's the twist: the Moai didn't go quietly. Evidence suggests they fought back with ingenuity, rebuilding canals higher up the valleys, shifting crops to drought-resistant legumes. For a time, it worked until another Super El Niño struck, this one even fiercer. The last murals show warriors with hollow eyes, their once proud regalia reduced to tatters. Then silence, no invasion, no mass graves, just empty pyramids where wind whistles through cracked frescoes of drowned gods. What lingers most hauntingly is their duality. These were people who painted orchids with botanical precision, yet believed decapitation could summon rain. A civilization that engineered aqueducts to outwit the desert, only to meet its end when the sky vomited water. their legacy whispers a warning. Even the most resilient cultures can fracture when nature shifts the rules. The Moai didn't vanish, they were erased layer by layer under floods that turned their prayers into screams. 13,000 years ago, a culture emerged across North America so skilled with stone that their spear points became a time capsule, fluted, razor-sharp blades known as Clovis points found from coast to coast. The Clovis people weren't just hunters, they were continent-wide pioneers, their tools appearing suddenly in the archaeological record like a flash of ingenuity. These were the first humans to truly spread across the Americas, chasing mammoths and giant bison through landscapes still shaking off the Ice Age. Then, in what feels like a geological heartbeat, they were gone. Their elegant points vanish from the record around 12,900 years ago, replaced by cruder tools, as if knowledge itself had been unspooled. The timing aligns with one of Earth's most bizarre climate events, the Younger Dryas. Just as the planet was warming, a sudden cold snap plunged temperatures back to glacial levels for over 1,000 years. But here's where it gets eerie. Sediment layers from that period contain nanodiamonds and platinum spikes, materials often linked to cosmic impacts. In caribou dung frozen since that era, scientists found traces of melted glass that only forms at temperatures hotter than volcanic eruptions. The theory, a fragmented comet may have exploded over North America, triggering wildfires so vast they blacken the sky. Ice core data from Greenland shows a soot layer precisely at this time, followed by a methane spike hinting at rotting megafauna carcasses. Yet the Clovis didn't just face fire from above. Their very success may have sealed their fate. Sites like Blackwater Draw in New Mexico reveal kill zones where dozens of mammoths were butchered, a testament to their hunting prowess. But as cold descended and prey dwindled, their specialized tools became a liability. Clovis points took hours to craft, each requiring a master flint-knapper to strike the perfect flute down the center. When disaster struck, there was no time for perfection. Later cultures adopted simpler, faster techniques, survival over artistry. The haunting question isn't just what ended the Clovis, but how much was lost. Their disappearance coincides with the extinction of North America's megafauna. Mammoths, giant sloths, even camels. Without large prey, the intricate knowledge of tracking and hunting them may have evaporated within generations. The Clovis didn't leave monuments or temples. Their legacy was written in fleeting moments, a perfectly crafted point lodged in a bison's rib, or the soot-stained soil of a world that burned twice over. In their end, we see a warning. Even the most adaptable cultures can fracture when the sky falls and the earth freezes in the same breath. In the sun-baked hills of Greece, the Mycenaeans built a civilization of warriors and traders, their massive stone citadels dominating the landscape from 1400 to 1200 BC. These were the people who likely inspired Homer's tales of Agamemnon and the Trojan War, their palaces filled with gold death masks and frescoes of charging chariots. But behind the glory lay a fragile system, one so tightly wound that when it snapped, it didn't just collapse the Mycenaeans, it dragged the entire Mediterranean into a dark age. The warning signs were etched in clay, thousands of linear B tablets preserved by the very fires that destroyed the palaces, record meticulous inventories, grain, olive oil, textiles, all carefully measured and redistributed by a rigid bureaucracy. In the final years, these records take a desperate turn. One tablet from Pylos pleads for extra rations to feed bronze smiths working overtime. Another lists towns failing to deliver their expected wheat quotas. Here's what's chilling: these weren't random shortages. They reveal a system buckling under its own complexity, where minor disruptions triggered catastrophic chain reactions. Climate data adds another layer. Pollen samples from Greek lakebeds show a sharp drop in olive and cereal crops around 1200 BC, likely due to prolonged droughts. But the Mycenaeans didn't just face empty granaries. Their entire economy relied on centralized palace control, with no real market mechanisms to absorb shocks. When harvests failed, the system strained. Then came the final blow, invasions, or at least that's what the charred layers in their citadels suggest. Yet these weren't foreign hordes sweeping in. The attackers might have been desperate neighbors, other Mycenaean cities, their own systems collapsing, turning on each other for survival. The aftermath was eerily total. Writing vanished for 4 centuries, pottery styles regressed to simpler forms, even the art of building in stone was forgotten. But perhaps the most haunting clue lies in what the Mycenaeans didn't do. They never tried to rebuild their palaces. When a society abandons not just its cities but the very idea of them, it suggests a loss deeper than war or famine, a collective crisis of faith in the system itself. Their legacy isn't just ruined walls, it's a warning about how civilizations can engineer their own fragility, turning prosperity into a house of cards. High on the Ethiopian plateau, where the air thins and the horizon stretches endlessly, the Aksumite Empire once stood as one of the ancient world's greatest powers. At its peak around 300 to 700 CE, Aksum wasn't just a kingdom, it was a titan of trade, its coins circulating from Rome to India, its fleets sailing the Red Sea alongside Egyptian and Persian merchants. Their towering obelisks, some reaching over 100 feet tall, weren't mere monuments, they were declarations of a civilization that rivaled Byzantium and Persia. Carved from single blocks of granite with precision that still baffles engineers, these stelae bore inscriptions in Jais, a script so enduring it's still used in Ethiopian liturgy today. But the Aksumites' greatest strength, their control of trade routes, became their Achilles' heel. As the Roman Empire crumbled, demand for African luxuries like ivory and frankincense dwindled. Worse, the rise of Islam in the 700s rerouted commerce away from the Red Sea toward newly thriving Persian Gulf ports. Aksum's wealth, once fed by camel caravans and monsoon winds, began to dry up like the seasonal rivers surrounding their capital. Excavations tell a telling story. Later coins are smaller, thinner, debased with cheaper metals, a silent testament to economic desperation. Yet trade wasn't their only crisis. The very land that sustained them turned traitor. Soil cores from the surrounding highlands reveal a grim pattern. Ancient pollen records show dense forests of olive and juniper, replaced over centuries by grasses, then finally dust. The Aksumites had mastered terrace farming, but their booming population demanded more timber for building, more fuel for their famous iron smelters, more farmland to feed their people. With each felled tree, the rains carried away irreplaceable topsoil. Their own agricultural innovations may have accelerated the disaster, as elaborate irrigation channels funneled erosion straight into their fields. The most haunting evidence lies not in what's gone, but in what remains. At the ancient site of Adulis, their Red Sea port, archaeologists found warehouses half buried in silt, floors strewn with broken amphorae and abandoned weights, as if merchants left mid-transaction. In the highlands, crops shifted from nutrient-rich teff to hardier but less profitable barley, a quiet admission of ecological defeat. Even their signature obelisks tell a story of decline. The later ones are shorter, cruder, some left unfinished in quarries. What's remarkable isn't that Aksum fell, but how long it clung to life. Long after the palaces emptied, their legacy endured in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which preserved their language and traditions. The Ark of the Covenant, allegedly housed in Aksum's Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, became a spiritual anchor for a people weathering the centuries. The obelisks still stand today, not just as tombstones for a lost empire, but as mile markers on a road that many civilizations travel, from abundance to adaptation, from grandeur to memory. The Aksumites didn't so much vanish as transform, their golden age fading into the very landscape they once ruled. Beneath the blistering sun of the American Southwest, the Anasazi, or ancestral Pueblones, built a civilization of staggering ingenuity, their stone towers and cliff dwellings clinging to canyon walls like swallows' nests. At the heart of their world stood Choco Canyon, a sprawling ceremonial hub where roads wider than modern highways stretched for miles, connecting great houses aligned with celestial events. These weren't just buildings, they were cosmic calendars in sandstone, their windows and doorways framing solstice sunrises with mathematical precision. Yet by the 1200s, this thriving society had emptied their grandest structures, leaving behind coiled ropes still dangling from Kiva ladders, as if they intended to return any moment. The trigger seems obvious at first glance: the Great Drought, a 23-year megadrought that parched the southwest from 1276 to 1299. Tree rings tell a horrifying story: years where growth all but stopped, where rain became a rumor. But the Anasazi had survived dry spells before. Their checked dams and reservoirs were marvels of water conservation, their crops drought-resistant. What changed? The answer lies in the bones. Excavations at sites like Castle Rock reveal mass graves, skeletons with smashed skulls and arrowheads lodged in vertebrae. One grim pit held the remains of 35 people, their bodies heaped atop each other, some burned. This wasn't just starvation, it was societal rupture. Here's where the mystery deepens. The violence wasn't uniform. At Choco itself, there's little evidence of conflict, just orderly abandonment. But outlier settlements tell a different tale. At Sand Canyon Pueblo, villagers built a defensive wall, then crammed inside like refugees until malnutrition left their bones pocked with lesions. Others, like those at Sacred Ridge, show signs of ethnic cleansing, entire lineages slaughtered, their distinct skull shapes absent from later burials. It's as if drought didn't kill the Anasazi so much as unravel the social contracts that held them together, turning neighbors into threats. Yet their legacy refuses to fade. Modern Pueblo tribes speak of migrations, not collapse, a deliberate scattering to smaller, sustainable settlements where communal rituals could reset. The roads leading out of Choco don't peter out, they fork purposefully, pointing toward new beginnings. Even their celestial knowledge endured. At Mesa Verde's Sun Temple, a spiral petroglyph still marks the summer solstice, its shadow splitting the carving like a blade of light. The Anasazi didn't vanish, they transformed, trading monumental ambition for survival. Their empty kivas whisper a truth as old as civilization itself. Sometimes the greatest act of resilience is knowing when to walk away. High in the thin air of the Andes, where the sky feels close enough to touch, the Tiwanaku civilization built a city that defied logic. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, their capital, also called Tiwanaku, boasted temples rivaling Egypt's, constructed from stones so precisely cut they fit together without mortar. Their engineers mastered the impossible, carving monolithic gateways aligned with solstices and designing raised fields that turned the harsh altiplano into a breadbasket. But their greatest ally, Lake Titicaca, would become their undoing, its retreating waters leaving sunken temples as haunting markers of a climate crisis that shattered an empire. The lake was their lifeline. Its vast expanse moderated temperatures, fed irrigation canals, and provided fish and reeds for boats and homes. Tiwanaku's agricultural system, the Suka Colossus, were genius in their simplicity: rectangular plots bordered by water channels that absorbed sunlight by day, releasing warmth at night to protect crops from frost. This innovation let them grow quinoa and potatoes in a region where modern farmers still struggle. But around 1000 CE, the lake began to shrink. Sediment cores tell the story. Layers of aquatic plants abruptly replaced by dryland grasses, then dust. The change wasn't gradual. Tree rings from nearby Polylepis forests revealed decades-long droughts, punctuated by violent floods that washed away topsoil. Archaeologists discovered the consequences in the ruins. The once bustling port of Lucumata, now landlocked, shows docks leading nowhere. The semi-subterranean Temple of the Sun, its walls studded with carved stone faces, sank as groundwater levels dropped, leaving its staircase rising eerily above the plaza. But the most chilling evidence lies in the trash. midden heaps from Tiwanaku's final years shift from fish bones to llama dung, a desperate pivot as the lake's bounty vanished. Skeletal remains show stunted growth and anemia, children raised on dwindling rations. Yet the Tiwanaku didn't just succumb to nature. Their downfall was a spiral of social and spiritual unraveling. When the rains failed, their priests who'd promised harmony through ritual lost credibility. Excavations reveal smashed monoliths, their deities' faces deliberately defaced. The elite compound of Akapana, once a pilgrimage site, became a squatter's camp, its drainage channels clogged with refuse. Here's the tragic twist: their engineering brilliance may have accelerated the collapse. Those intricate canals, designed for a stable lake, couldn't adapt to erratic rains. Drought left them dry, floods choked them with silt. What lingers today isn't just ruins, but a warning written in stone and sediment. The Tiwanaku didn't vanish, they dispersed, their descendants weaving their techniques into Inca agriculture centuries later. But their empty city whispers a truth as cold as the Andean wind. No amount of ingenuity can outlast a world in flux. When the water withdraws, even gods drown. At the confluence of the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois rivers, a city once thrived with a population rivaling medieval London, Cahokia, the crown jewel of the Mississippian civilization. Around 1000 CE, this metropolis boasted over 120 earthen mounds, including Monk's Mound, a colossal structure covering 14 acres at its base and towering 100 feet high. The Grand Plaza below could have held 10,000 people for ceremonies, its soil still littered with fragments of ceremonial copper and shell beads from distant coasts. Yet by 1350, the streets fell silent, the mounds abandoned to the elements. What could make a society so prosperous simply walk away from its greatest achievements? The answer lies beneath the soil, literally. Core samples taken from Cahokia's farmland reveal a grim depletion of nutrients. For centuries, the Mississippians practiced intensive maize cultivation, relying on the fertile floodplains. But as population density soared, they expanded uphill, clearing forests and triggering erosion. Studies of soil strata show layers of rich black earth abruptly replaced by sterile yellow subsoil, the mark of agricultural exhaustion. Worse, pollen records indicate a shift from diverse crops to near-total reliance on corn, a dangerous gamble when climate stability faltered. Then came the Little Ice Age's advance guard. Tree rings from the region document a series of brutal cold snaps starting around 1300, shortening growing seasons and withering harvests. But here's where the story twists. Cahokia's decline wasn't just about starving farmers. Recent excavations at the sprawling stockade site uncovered a palisade wall rebuilt multiple times, each iteration more haphazard than the last. Burials within the final enclosure show signs of malnutrition and violent trauma, including skull fractures from blunt weapons. Some archaeologists interpret this as evidence of social fracturing, elites clinging to power as resources dwindled, sparking internal revolts. Others point to the rise of smaller, fortified settlements like Aztlan to the north, suggesting a diaspora toward more sustainable lands. The most haunting clues, though, lie in what they left behind. At Mound 72, a mass grave holds the remains of 53 young women, their skeletons arranged in rows with signs of ritual sacrifice. Nearby, a single male burial atop a bed of 20,000 shell beads suggests a revered leader, or perhaps a desperate offering to gods who'd stopped listening. The Mississippians didn't vanish, they scattered, their descendants merging with Siouan and Caddoan peoples. Their legacy lingers in the oral traditions of tribes like the Osage, who speak of ancestors who walked toward the sun. The mounds still stand today, not as tombstones, but as monuments to a lesson etched in earth. Even the most fertile ground can turn to dust when pushed beyond its limits. In the scorching heart of the Sahara, where dunes stretch like an ocean of gold, the Garamontes built an empire where no empire should have been. These weren't primitive cave dwellers. As Roman historians dismissively labeled them, they were hydraulic geniuses who turned the world's harshest desert into a green haven. Their secret, the fagaras, an underground labyrinth of canals that tapped into ancient aquifers, channeling water to fields and cities with precision that still astonishes engineers today. While Europe languished in the Dark Ages, the Garamantes were laying pipes beneath the sand, their system stretching over 1,600 kilometers, longer than the entire Roman road network in Britain. Their capital, Garama, rose from the Libyan desert like a mirage, its streets lined with palm groves and vineyards. Satellite imagery reveals ghostly outlines of settlements where none should exist: circular compounds, fortified granaries, even remnants of olive presses. But what's truly staggering is how they thrived without a single permanent river. The fagaras worked like subterranean arteries, sloping gently so water flowed by gravity alone. Maintenance tunnels dotted the routes, allowing workers to clear blockages, a system so effective that some fagaras still function today, 2,000 years later. Then, around 500 CE, the water stopped. Core samples from nearby lakes tell the grim story. Aquifer levels plummeted as the Garamantes pumped faster than nature could replenish. The fagaras, once a lifeline, became dry graves. But here's the twist: this wasn't just environmental folly. Inscriptions suggest they knew the risks, yet kept expanding, drilling deeper as elites demanded more water for lavish gardens and public baths. A single grapevine imported from Rome might consume a family's yearly water ration. The very technology that birthed their civilization hastened its demise. Yet the Garamantes didn't vanish without a trace. Their descendants, the Tuareg, still whisper tales of the ones who walked with water. And in the ruins of Garama's baths, where steam once rose over mosaic floors, archaeologists found something haunting: silt-caked filters from the last working fagara, clogged with the very sand that finally choked an empire. Their legacy isn't just a warning about hubris, it's proof that even in the driest earth, human ingenuity can bloom until the well runs dry. Deep in the forests of what is now Nigeria, a culture thrived whose artistry would echo across millennia: the Nok. Famous for their striking terracotta sculptures, these were no primitive artisans. Their figures, with their elaborate hairstyles and intricate jewelry, display a sophistication that still leaves archaeologists in awe. Dating back to around 500 BC, the Nok were among West Africa's earliest ironworkers, their furnaces blazing a technological trail while much of the continent still relied on stone tools. Yet by 500 CE, their workshops fell silent, their villages abandoned, leaving behind only fragments of their stunning sculptures buried in the red earth. What makes their disappearance so puzzling isn't just the sudden halt in production, it's the paradoxical role their greatest innovation may have played in their downfall. Ironworking required staggering amounts of charcoal, and to produce it, the Nok felled vast swaths of forest. Soil samples from their region show layers of charcoal ash, followed by erosion patterns that suggest stripped land struggling to recover. Pollen records paint a stark picture: once dense woodlands replaced by grasses, then finally dust. The very skill that brought them prestige, smelting ore into tools and weapons, may have consumed the ecosystem that sustained them. But deforestation wasn't their only challenge. Climate shifts squeezed them from another angle. Lake sediment cores from nearby Chad reveal a prolonged drying trend around the time of their decline, shrinking water sources just as their farmlands degraded. Some villages show signs of hurried departure: clusters of terracotta fragments buried in pits, as if hidden for safekeeping against an uncertain return. Others were simply swallowed by the advancing savanna, their once fertile fields overtaken by hardy shrubs. The Nok didn't vanish without leaving traces, though. Their coiled pottery techniques and lost wax metal casting methods appear centuries later in the Benin and Ife kingdoms, suggesting their knowledge survived even as their identity faded. Those haunting terracotta faces, some grinning, others solemn, now gaze from museum, displays silent witnesses to a civilization that mastered fire and earth, only to be undone by the very forces they sought to control. Their legacy whispers a timeless truth: progress unchecked can dig its own grave. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, where the earth itself seems to breathe through hot springs and volcanic rock, the Hittites forged an empire that shook the Bronze Age world. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress city of cyclopean stone walls and secret tunnels, its gates guarded by colossal stone lions. These were the people who challenged Egypt's Ramses the Great at Kadesh, who pioneered the use of iron weapons, and who compiled history's first known peace treaty on silver tablets. Yet around 1200 BC, at the height of their power, the Hittite Empire disintegrated so completely that its very existence faded into myth until archaeologists unearthed its ruins 3,000 years later. The clues to their downfall lie in the charred remains of Hattusa's royal archives, thousands of clay tablets baked harder by the fires that destroyed the city, preserved desperate pleas from regional governors. One message from the port of Ugarit reads like a scream across millennia: "Our food is gone, the ships of the enemy are at our shores, where are your troops?" Another tablet, addressed to Egypt's pharaoh, begs for grain shipments as famine tightens its grip. "Let my brothers send me bread, for there is death in our lands." The enemy they feared wasn't just an invading army, it was a phantom menace scribes called the Sea Peoples, a loose coalition of raiders who descended like locusts upon every shoreline from Greece to the Levant. But the Hittites' collapse was more than just a story of external assault. Recent isotope analysis of bones from Hattusa's last inhabitants reveals the darker truth hidden beneath the tablet's words. Skeletal remains show stunted growth and spongy bone lesions, telltale marks of prolonged malnutrition. Tree rings from Anatolian junipers confirm a devastating drought spanning decades, one that would have withered the empire's wheat fields and emptied its granaries. The Hittites' mighty war chariots, once unstoppable on open plains, became useless when there was no grain to feed the horses. Even their famed iron may have betrayed them. Unlike bronze, which relied on scarce tin traded from afar, iron ore was plentiful in Hittite lands, but smelting it required vast quantities of charcoal fuel that could only come from deforestation. Pollen studies show forests receding dramatically in the empire's final century, suggesting an ecological reckoning. The very innovation that made them formidable likely accelerated their undoing. The final act played out with eerie silence. Hattusa's gates weren't breached in battle, they were deliberately set ablaze by its own people. In the citadel's inner sanctum, priests buried the empire's most sacred relics, storm god statues and bronze tablets, under orderly layers of earth, as if preparing for a return that never came. The Sea Peoples didn't destroy the Hittites so much as deliver the coup de grace to a civilization already buckling under drought, famine, and ecological strain. What lingers today isn't just ruins, but a sobering lesson in interconnectivity. The Hittites fell not in isolation, but as part of a domino collapse that toppled every great Bronze Age power, from Mycenae to Egypt. Their fate whispers a warning we'd do well to heed. Even the mightiest empires are woven into a fragile web where one thread snapping can unravel them all. The stone lions of Hattusa still stare blankly from their gateposts, their mouths frozen mid-roar. A monument not just to what was lost, but to how swiftly the pillars of civilization can crumble when the world grows hungry. Buried beneath the shifting sands of China's Taklamakan Desert, the Thera mummies tell a story so unexpected it rewrote history books. These weren't the remains of ancient Han Chinese or Mongol horsemen. They were tall, fair-haired people with European features, dressed in vibrantly patterned woolens that wouldn't look out of place in Celtic Britain. Dating back as early as 1800 BC, these perfectly preserved bodies, their facial tattoos still dark against leathery skin, belonged to a culture that thrived for millennia along the Silk Road's deadliest stretch. Their very existence defies assumptions about how the ancient world connected or didn't. What's most baffling isn't just their appearance, but the relics they carried. One mummy, the so-called Beauty of Lulan, wore a pointed hat straight out of a Bronze Age Scandinavian village, her grave filled with ephedra twigs used in rituals eerily similar to those described in Zoroastrian texts. Another, the Chechen man, had red-haired braids and a crimson tunic woven with diagonal herringbone patterns identical to fabrics found in Austria's Hallstatt culture. Even their language, deciphered from brittle manuscripts in forgotten tombs, turned out to be Tocharian, an Indo-European tongue closer to Latin and Celtic than to Mandarin. How did these fair-skinned wanderers end up farming millet in the heart of Asia, their burial sites dotted with phallic symbols and sun wheels that wouldn't seem out of place in prehistoric Germany? The answer lies in the Taklamakan's merciless geography. The desert, whose name means "you go in but never come out," acted as both killer and preserver. Rivers that once fed oasis settlements like Nia and Lulan dried up or changed course, stranding communities in slowly advancing dunes. But the same arid conditions that doomed them also mummified their dead with startling detail, even eyelashes intact, children's toys still clutched in tiny hands. Excavations reveal a people caught between worlds. Their pottery echoes Chinese designs, yet their DNA traces back to the Afanasevo herders of Siberia, migrants who crossed Central Asia's steppes millennia before Genghis Khan. Their disappearance wasn't sudden conquest, but slow absorption. By the time the Han dynasty's envoys reached the region around 200 BCE, these once distinct communities were already blending with Tibetan and Turkic newcomers. The mummy's descendants likely became the Tocharians later recorded by Buddhist pilgrims, still speaking their odd European-sounding language in oasis towns, but increasingly intermarried with neighboring groups. Even their textiles tell the story of fading identity. Early layers show intricate Celtic spirals, while later graves yield simpler weaves copied from Mongolian felt. Today, the mummy's silent stares from museum cases raise uncomfortable questions. Their existence proves the Silk Road was more than a highway for silk and spices. It was a river of genes and ideas flowing both ways long before recorded history. The real mystery isn't why they vanished, but how we forgot them so completely. Perhaps their legacy lies in what they left behind. Not just well-preserved bodies, but the indelible proof that ancient cultures mixed in ways that still startle us, their stories woven into the fabric of civilizations yet unborn. Perched atop a flattened mountain in Mexico's Oaxaca Valley, Monte Albán wasn't just a city, it was a statement. The Zapotecs carved their capital from the very bones of the earth, leveling the peak to create a sprawling plaza flanked by stepped pyramids and observatories. For over 1,000 years, this citadel dominated the region, its influence stretching to the distant edges of Mesoamerica. Yet around 800 CE, the heart of Zapotec power ceased beating. No invading army breached its gates, no natural disaster toppled its temples. Instead, the abandonment of Monte Albán reads like a slow-motion unraveling, with clues etched into the stone faces of its own monuments. The fractures began at the top. Excavations reveal a chilling pattern. Dozens of carved stelae, stone slabs depicting rulers with elaborate headdresses deliberately defaced. Eyes gouged out, noses smashed, hieroglyphic names chiseled away. This wasn't random vandalism, it was targeted damnatio memoriae, the systematic erasure of a dynasty's legacy. Elite tombs tell a similar story: jade ornaments shattered, murals painted over with crude designs, even skeletons rearranged in disrespectful poses. The message is clear: the very people who built Monte Albán's glory turned against their own past. But why? The answer may lie in the valley below. As Monte Albán's power waned, smaller centers like Lambatico and Jallieza rose, their own elite compounds flaunting wealth that once flowed to the mountain capital. Skeletal studies from this period show stark disparities: commoners with signs of malnutrition, while local rulers grew plumper on diets rich in imported delicacies. It seems the Zapotec system, once held together by shared religious devotion and centralized rule, fractured into rival factions. The final blow may have been environmental. Sediment cores from nearby Lake Mitla expose layers of erosion coinciding with Monte Alban's decline, suggesting deforestation stripped the hillsides bare. Yet the most haunting evidence comes from the city itself. In its final years, grand palaces were subdivided into cramped workshops. Temples became storage rooms for mundane goods. The Great Ball Court, where nobles once reenacted cosmic battles, was repurposed for grinding corn. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but a quiet unraveling, a civilization not conquered from without, but hollowed from within. The Zapotecs didn't vanish, they simply walked down the mountain, leaving their monuments to stare emptily across the valley, their stones whispering a timeless lesson. No kingdom falls until its own rulers forget why it stood. High in Colombia's mist-shrouded Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, where jagged peaks brush the clouds, the Tairona people carved a civilization from stone and gold, then vanished into legend. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1500s, hungry for plunder, they marveled at reports of cities where temple roofs gleamed with gold sheets, where artisans crafted hummingbird pendants so delicate their wings trembled in the breeze. But by the time invaders reached their mountain strongholds, the Tairona had already melted into the jungle, leaving behind empty stone pathways and silent terraces clinging to sheer cliffs. The Spaniards never found their legendary Golden King, but modern archaeology has uncovered something far more precious: the Tairona's ingenious urban planning. Their city of Tayuna, now called Ciudad Perdida, sprawled across the mountainside with a sophistication that defies the rugged terrain. Over 160 circular stone platforms formed the city's backbone, connected by cobbled causeways and staircases that followed the land's natural contours. Most astonishing were their drainage systems, channels lined with stones so precisely fitted that even today, after 5 centuries of jungle growth, monsoon rains cascade harmlessly through the ruins. This wasn't just survival, it was symbiosis with nature. But the Tairona's true legacy lies not in what they abandoned, but in who remembers. 4 indigenous groups, the Kogi, Wiwa, Ahuoko, and Kankuamo, still inhabit these mountains, calling themselves the elder brothers of humanity. Their oral traditions preserve astonishing details of Tairona life, how priests used gold not for wealth, but as conduits to commune with the sun, how every terrace was aligned with sacred stars now identified by astronomers as part of the Orion constellation. In their woven mochila bags, the same geometric patterns found on ancient Tairona pottery still tell stories of creation. What's most remarkable is their survival strategy. When the Spanish launched slave raids, the Tairona didn't just flee, they transformed. Abandoning large settlements, they fractured into mobile family units, moving higher into nearly inaccessible valleys. Spanish chronicles from 1599 describe frustrated soldiers finding only cold hearths and stone-lined gardens still bearing crops, the people always just beyond reach. Over generations, this diaspora developed into the 4 distinct tribes, each preserving different fragments of Tairona knowledge like pieces of a shattered mirror. The jungle has guarded their secrets well. As recently as the 1970s, looters hunting for gold stumbled upon Ciudad Perdida, its location still known only to locals. When archaeologists arrived, they found something unexpected: not a dead city, but a living shrine. Fresh offerings of coca leaves and seashells lay atop ancient platforms placed by Kogi Mama's spiritual leaders who still make pilgrimages to the heart of the world. The Tairona never truly disappeared. They became the mountains themselves, their golden legacy living on not in museums, but in the whispered prayers of descendants who still walk their sacred stone path. Long before golden crowns glittered in Scylla's royal tombs, an even older mystery lay buried beneath Korea's rolling hills: the dolmens, These massive stone slabs, some weighing over 100 tons, perch on the landscape like silent sentinels from a forgotten age. Scattered across the Korean peninsula in their thousands, they form the densest concentration of such monuments anywhere on Earth. But here's what's astonishing. While European dolmens often mark isolated graves, Korea's cluster in groups, their arrangement hinting at a social order far more complex than historians once assumed. Look closer at these prehistoric puzzles and patterns emerge. Near Gochang, dolmens align in rows like teeth in a comb, their capstones precisely leveled despite lacking metal tools. In Hwasun, clusters gather near ancient river routes suggesting trade networks. Most revealing are the table-type dolmens, two vertical stones supporting a single massive roof slab, found almost exclusively near fertile valleys. These weren't just tombs, they were territorial markers proclaiming control over prime farmland. The labor required to haul these stones, some sourced from quarries kilometers away, speaks of coordinated labor on a scale that demands chiefs, priests, or kings. Yet no written record of these rulers survives. The artifacts pulled from beneath these slabs deepen the intrigue. Jade ornaments polished to mirror like smoothness, pottery stamped with intricate chord patterns, and most puzzling polished stone daggers too fragile for battle. These were likely symbols of authority, precursors to the later Silla kingdom's gleaming gold crowns. Even the bones tell a story. Some dolmens contain skeletons buried with shell middens heaped at their feet as if in offering. Others hold multiple generations, suggesting ancestor veneration that would later become central to Korean culture. What shattered this early hierarchy? Climate provides a clue. Sediment cores from nearby wetlands show a dramatic shift around 1000 BC, pollen from oak and pine giving way to grasses, signaling deforestation. At the same time, bronze arrives from Liaoning, disrupting old power structures tied to stone. The dolmen builders didn't vanish, they adapted, their descendants perhaps becoming the mythic Jin people mentioned in Chinese chronicles, who described Eastern barbarians with jade and towering stone tombs. The most haunting legacy lies in continuity. When archaeologists opened a Silla tomb 1500 years later, they found the same jade beads and polished daggers, now in gold, placed just so around the body. The dolmens stand as silent witnesses to an unbroken thread. Korea's earliest rulers may be nameless, but their rituals echo through time, their stones whispering of a time when power was measured not in written decrees, but in how many hands could move a mountain. Along the Danube's winding banks, where Serbia's soil meets the horizon, a people thrived 7,000 years ago whose artifacts whisper of a sophistication far beyond their time, the Vincha. Their settlements, sprawling across the Balkans, weren't just clusters of huts but organized communities with specialized workshops, multi-room houses, and even the earliest known evidence of copper smelting in Europe. But what truly sets them apart lies in the palm of your hand. Tiny clay tablets incised with symbols so deliberate, so repetitive, they've ignited fierce debate. Could this be humankind's first writing, predating Mesopotamian cuneiform by over 2 millennia? The marks themselves are haunting in their simplicity: linear strokes, crosses, zigzags etched onto figurines, spindle walls, and ritual objects. Unlike later scripts tied to accounting or kingship, the Vincha symbols cluster in ways that suggest something more personal, perhaps even sacred. One recurring motif, a branching tree-like glyph, appears beside what might be a rooftop or vessel, leading some researchers to theorize these were ownership marks or prayers for bountiful harvest. Others point to the staggering consistency of these symbols across hundreds of kilometers and centuries, a shared language of signs that connected distant villages long before roads or wheels. Yet the Vincha's most enigmatic legacy isn't etched in clay, it's molded by fire. Their voluptuous goddess figurines with exaggerated hips and staring eyes litter excavation sites like echoes of a forgotten cosmology. Some clutch their bellies, others perch on throne-like stools, their faces frozen in expressions that could be serenity or sorrow. These weren't mere toys, their fragments are often found in ovens and grain storage pits, suggesting rituals to safeguard food or fertility. The sheer number of these figurines hints at a society where the divine feminine wasn't just worshipped but woven into daily survival. What could silence such a vibrant culture? Climate cores from nearby lakes reveal the answer in layers of pollen and dust. Around 4,500 BC, the Balkan climate grew erratic decades of drought-withered wheat fields, followed by violent floods that stripped topsoil. Vincha villages, once thriving on riverfront fertility, show signs of desperate adaptation. Houses built on stilts, then abandoned mid-construction. But here's the twist, their disappearance wasn't sudden. Later settlements feature cruder pottery, simpler tools, as if knowledge itself was unraveling generation by generation. The final mystery lingers in those unreadable symbols. If they truly were proto-writing, their meaning died with the last Vincha elder who understood them. Unlike later civilizations that collapsed with fanfare, burned cities or conquered capitals, the Vincha faded like a whisper, their clay tablets left behind as mute witnesses to a cognitive leap too fragile for a changing world. Their legacy isn't just in what they invented, but in the eerie question they leave us. How many other firsts have vanished without a trace, their secrets buried under the quiet weight of time? In the fertile basin of China's Sichuan province, where the Minjiang River winds through mist-shrouded plains, an archaeological discovery in 1986 shattered long-held assumptions about ancient Chinese civilization. Workers digging drainage ditches near the village of Sangsingdui struck bronze, not just fragments, but a cache of artifacts so bizarre, so unlike anything found before, that scholars initially questioned their authenticity. Two sacrificial pits yielded over 1,000 items: gold masks with exaggerated almond-shaped eyes, towering bronze statues with reptilian pupils, jade tablets carved with symbols that still defy translation. This wasn't just another Bronze Age culture, it was a previously unknown kingdom that flourished alongside the Shang dynasty, yet followed its own mesmerizing spiritual path before deliberately burying its treasures and vanishing around 1100 BC. The most haunting relics are those bronze masks, some stretching nearly 4 feet wide, their colossal ears and tubular eyes resembling beings not quite human. One particularly eerie figure stands 8 feet tall, a slender, elongated statue with clawed hands clasped in ritual gesture, its torso adorned with intricate dragon motifs. The craftsmanship staggers experts. These weren't crude effigies, but masterpieces cast using advanced piece mold techniques, some layered with gold foil so thin it clings like skin. Stranger still, many artifacts show signs of intentional breakage, swords bent at unnatural angles, masks shattered along their seams before being neatly arranged in the pits alongside burnt animal bones and elephant tusks. This was no hasty concealment, it was a ceremonial farewell. What could prompt such a deliberate interment? Geological surveys reveal a possible culprit lurking underground. Sediment layers near Sangsingdui show sudden deposits of sand and gravel consistent with catastrophic flooding, possibly triggered by an earthquake that diverted the nearby river. Ancient texts from later periods mention a mysterious Shu kingdom destroyed when the earth tilted and the waters overturned, yet warfare may have compounded the disaster. Arrowheads embedded in the pit walls and traces of scorched earth suggest violence preceded the burial. Here's where the mystery deepens. Shortly after Sangsingdui's abandonment, a new cultural hub emerged just 30 miles away at Jinsha. Its artifacts share unmistakable similarities, the same sunbird motifs, the same reverence for ivory, but with notable shifts. The grotesque bronze masks are gone, replaced by more naturalistic human figures. Could this be the same people reinventing their identity after catastrophe, or invaders who appropriated fragments of a culture they conquered? The absence of written records leaves only whispers in the artifacts. Those haunting masks might represent ancestor worship, elongated features symbolizing communication with spirits. or perhaps they depict deities from a lost cosmology, their staring eyes meant to see across worlds. The deliberate destruction suggests a ritual decommissioning, as if to render the objects spiritually inert before burial. Modern technology peels back another layer of intrigue. Lead isotope analysis traces the bronze origin to mines hundreds of miles away, proving Sangsingdui was no isolated backwater but a hub of long-distance trade. Meanwhile, DNA from human remains reveals diverse ethnic ties, hinting at a multicultural center where ideas fused into something entirely new. Sangsingdui's legacy isn't just in what was buried, but in how completely it was forgotten. Unlike the Shang, whose oracle bones survived as a continuous thread, this kingdom vanished from memory until a backhoe's accidental strike. Their treasures now stand in glass cases, those hollow eyes watching us across 30 centuries not just as artifacts, but as question marks hammered in bronze, daring us to unravel why a civilization would hide its soul before walking away. Perched along the arid coast of Peru, where desert meets ocean in an unbroken stretch of brown and blue, the North Chico civilization defied every expectation. While most ancient cultures left behind pottery shards as calling cards, these enigmatic people built their legacy in stone and cotton. Dating back to 3500 BC, centuries before Egypt's pyramids rose from the sands, their stepped pyramids at sites like Caral and Espero stand as the oldest in the Americas. But here's what's truly baffling. Despite their monumental architecture, archaeologists find almost no ceramics. No painted vessels, no storage jars, just a few crude fragments that look like afterthoughts. How does a society master complex construction while seemingly ignoring a technology as basic as fired clay? The answer lies in their unusual economic engine, cotton. North Chico's valleys were verdant oases fed by seasonal rivers, perfect for growing Gossypium barbadense, a prized strain that produced long, silky fibers. Fishing nets woven from this cotton became their gold, traded inland for staples like squash and beans in a symbiotic exchange that powered their growth. At Espero, a sprawling seaside settlement, storage rooms overflowed with anchovy bones, evidence of massive-scale fishing enabled by those very nets. The system was ingenious. Farmers grew cotton, fishermen wove it into nets to haul in protein-rich catches, and everyone thrived. Even their pyramids might have been built with this network in mind, less as temples than as ceremonial hubs where goods were exchanged under the watch of elites. Then came the cracks in this carefully balanced system. Core samples from nearby lagoons reveal a devastating pattern. Around 1800 BC, the seasonal rivers that fed North Chico's cotton fields began drying up. Sand layers abruptly replace silt deposits, the telltale mark of prolonged drought. But here's the twist: the collapse wasn't immediate. Archaeologists found evidence of desperate adaptation. Canals dug deeper, fields moved closer to shrinking water sources. Their final act was especially haunting. At Carol's main pyramid, workers deliberately buried the structure's central hearth under layers of stone and sand, as if ritually closing the site before walking away. No signs of invasion, no mass graves, just orderly departure. What makes North Chico's disappearance so poignant is what didn't survive them. Unlike later Andean cultures, they left no vivid textiles, no intricate metalwork, not even a decipherable symbol system. Their legacy is written in negative space, the absence of pottery highlighting their cotton-first economy, the lack of weapons suggesting a remarkably peaceful society. Even their pyramids, once whitewashed and towering, now blend into the desert hills, mute witnesses to a civilization that bet everything on fragile river valleys and lost. Their silent ruins whisper a warning as old as agriculture itself. When your wealth grows on stalks and your gods live in water, the sky holds your fate. Scattered across the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, from Papua New Guinea to Tonga, shards of pottery tell an extraordinary tale, one written in delicate geometric patterns pressed into clay, then left behind like breadcrumbs across uninhabited islands. These are the Lapita, a people who embarked on the greatest maritime migration the ancient world had ever seen, sailing into the unknown with nothing but the stars, the swell of waves, and an unshakable will to find new shores. Starting around 1500 BC, their distinctive pottery adorned with intricate designs made from tiny dentate stamps appears suddenly on remote islands, marking the first human footprints in lands untouched by time. Then, just as abruptly, many settlements were abandoned, their ceramic legacy the only proof they'd ever been there at all. What makes the Lapita story so gripping isn't just their seafaring prowess, it's the puzzle of their retreat. On islands like Tokopia and Malai, their villages thrived for generations with earth ovens, stilt houses, and evidence of thriving trade in obsidian and shell valuables. Yet on others, like Nanumbo in the Solomon Islands, they lingered just long enough to leave behind shattered pots before pushing onward, the prevailing theory. They weren't just explorers, they were refugees from their own success. DNA studies of modern Polynesians trace their ancestry directly to Lapita groups, suggesting these weren't random voyages but a deliberate expansion. Yet climate data reveals a hidden pressure. Rising sea levels around 1200 BC flooded coastal habitats in near Oceania, their original homeland. The Lapita didn't just seek new lands, they were running out of old ones. Their pottery provides silent clues to this unraveling. Early shards show elaborate designs, each stamp a possible family or clan signature. Later pieces grow simpler, then vanish entirely, not just from abandoned islands, but even in continuing settlements like Fiji. Some archaeologists interpret this as a cultural pivot. As voyages grew longer, fragile ceramics may have been replaced with woven baskets or wooden bowls. Others see something darker, the strains of migration fracturing social bonds, with shared artistic traditions collapsing under the weight of dispersion. The most haunting sights are those where pottery appears alongside tools but no human remains. On Musau Island, a settlement's worth of artifacts sits undisturbed, as if the inhabitants simply stepped into their canoes one day and never returned. The Lapita's true legacy lies in what they carried forward. Their descendants would become the Polynesians, whose celestial navigation skills would eventually reach as far as Easter Island and Hawaii. Yet their early abandonments whisper a cautionary tale. On tiny, resource-poor atolls, even a minor shift, a storm destroying coconut groves, a freshwater spring turning brackish, could render an island untenable. Unlike civilizations that collapsed inward, the Lapita had an escape route, the horizon. Their story isn't one of defeat, but of adaptation so relentless it looks like disappearance. Those patterned potsherds, half buried in beach sand, aren't tombstones, they're mile markers on humanity's greatest journey. Each fragment a testament to the courage it takes to sail beyond the edge of the known world, even if it means leaving everything behind. Long before Rome became the colossus that bestrode the ancient world, another civilization shaped its soul, the Etruscans. These enigmatic people, flourishing in what is now Tuscany from around 900 to 300 BC, were more than just neighbors to the fledgling Romans, they were their mentors. The Romans borrowed everything from them: road-building techniques, gladiatorial games, even the ominous practice of reading omens in animal entrails. Yet, unlike empires that fell to swords or natural disasters, the Etruscans didn't so much collapse as dissolve, their identity melting into Rome's rising star until their very language became a dead whisper on crumbling tombs. The mystery starts with their origins. Ancient historians like Herodotus claimed they sailed from Lydia in Anatolia, while Dionysius of Halicarnassus insisted they were indigenous Italians. Modern DNA adds tantalizing clues. Genetic studies of Etruscan burial sites reveal close ties to Neolithic populations of Central Europe, yet their language, a non-Indo-European relic with eerie similarities to inscriptions found on the Aegean island of Lemnos, suggests a far more complex journey. Their texts, written in an alphabet borrowed from the Greeks but utterly alien in vocabulary, remain only partially deciphered, leaving us to piece together their worldview from the vivid frescoes adorning their cities of the dead. Step into an Etruscan tomb and you're engulfed by color and motion. Where Egyptian burial chambers depict solemn stillness, Etruscan paintings burst with life, banqueting couples reclining on couches, dancers twirling to flute music, dolphins leaping across azure waves. This wasn't a culture obsessed with death, but one that celebrated existence in all its sensual glory. Even their sarcophagi depict husbands and wives embracing for eternity, their faces animated with smiles rather than the stoic solemnity of Roman portraiture. Yet beneath the revelry lies a darker thread, demons with hooked noses and winged horrors, hinting at a belief in a perilous journey to the afterlife. Rome's conquest of Etruria wasn't a sudden conquest but a slow suffocation. Early on, Etruscan kings like Tarquin the Proud actually ruled Rome itself. But as the Republic grew, Etruscan cities were gradually stripped of autonomy. The final blow came in 89 BC when Rome granted Etruscans full citizenship, a seeming generosity that erased their legal distinctiveness. Their language, already fading, retreated to ritual use by priests before vanishing entirely. Even their religion, once so influential, was absorbed and repackaged. The Etruscan goddess Uni became Rome's Juno, while their sky god Tinia merged with Jupiter. Yet traces linger in unexpected places. That iconic symbol of Rome, the she-wolf nursing Romulus and Remus, it's actually an Etruscan bronze, later fitted with Renaissance-era twins. The toga, originally the Etruscan tebena, worn with a flourish before Romans stiffened it into a status marker. Even the word persona comes from the Etruscan fursu, referring to the masked actors in their theatrical rituals. The Etruscans didn't disappear, they became the invisible scaffolding of Roman greatness, their innovations so thoroughly adopted that their origins were forgotten. What's most haunting isn't their assimilation, but the glimpses of what might have been. Had Etruscan city-states united rather than squabbled, might their looser, more egalitarian society, where women dined alongside men and could inherit property, have shaped Western civilization instead of Rome's rigid patriarchy? Their tomb paintings suggest a world where joy was sacred and death just another banquet. Today, their silent frescoes watch us across millennia, not as warnings of extinction, but as reminders that even the most vibrant cultures can fade not with a bang but a whisper. Deep in the dust-blown borderlands of modern Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, where the Amu Darya River, known anciently as the Oxus, carves a lifeline through the desert, a civilization thrived that connected worlds. The Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, or BMAC, wasn't just another Bronze Age culture. It was the beating heart of a trade network stretching from the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia, a place where lapis lazuli from Afghanistan met tin from Iran, where intricately carved seals depicting gods with crescent moon crowns traveled farther than the people who made them. Around 2200 BC, their fortified cities like Ghana de Pere and Dashli buzzed with artisans crafting silver goblets and chlorite vessels adorned with twisted serpents. Then, within centuries, their gates stood empty, their sophisticated irrigation canals choked with sand, their legacy surviving only in cryptic references in Sumerian tablets as the mysterious land of Aratta. What makes the BMAC disappearance so baffling isn't just the abrupt abandonment, but the clues they left behind. Thousands of seals, many unearthed in distant Mesopotamian cities like Urd, depict scenes that seem ripped from later Hindu mythology. Horned deities seated in yogic postures, serpentine creatures entwined around sacred trees. Even more telling are the sudden shifts in burial practices. Early graves hold orderly arrangements of ceramic vessels and bronze pins, while later ones reveal hasty mass interments, skeletons piled atop one another with broken weapons scattered nearby. The message in the dirt is clear: something or someone shattered their world. The leading suspect, the Aryans, not the mythical super race of Nazi fantasy, but the real-life pastoralists whose migration across Eurasia reshaped cultures from India to Europe. Linguistic evidence shows Sanskrit and Old Persian sharing roots with Bhimak words for axle and chariot, hinting at contact or conflict. At Togolok 21, a Bhimak site in Turkmenistan, archaeologists uncovered a temple later repurposed by newcomers, its altars scorched with fire rituals matching those described in the Rigveda, the oldest Hindu text. Yet this wasn't a simple case of invaders erasing a culture. The Bhimak artistry lived on in Aryan metalwork. Their goddess figurines evolved into Hindu device. Even their obsession with ritual purity foreshadowed caste systems. The climate may have been the silent accomplice. Sediment cores from the nearby Karakum Desert reveal a grim timeline. Around 1800 BC, the Oxus River's tributaries began drying up, turning lush delta farms into cracked earth. Bhimak engineers had mastered water distribution with precisely sloped canals, but their system relied on predictable snowmelt from the Pamirs, a lifeline severed when temperatures rose. Starving refugees might have flooded the city's overwhelming social order. The most haunting relics are the Bactrian princesses, elaborately bedecked female figurines buried with mirrors and cosmetics, their wide eyes staring blankly from beneath gilded headdresses. Were they priestesses of a forgotten religion, royal hostages in a crumbling dynasty? Their silent grace embodies the Bhimak paradox, a civilization advanced enough to trade jewels with Sumer, yet so fragile that when the rains failed and the horsemen came, they left no chronicles, only echoes in the myths of those who came after. Their cities didn't burn, they emptied, as if the people simply stepped off history's stage, their gold still gleaming in forgotten tombs beneath the drifting sand. On the isolated shores of Easter Island, where the silent moai stand guard over a landscape stripped of trees, another mystery lingers, one not carved in stone but etched into wood. When Polynesian settlers first reached Rapa Nui around 1200 CE, they encountered more than just empty beaches. Scattered near ceremonial platforms were wooden tablets covered in glyphs unlike any they'd seen before, sinuous figures of birdmen, crescent moons, and strange plant forms, all arranged in alternating lines that reversed direction with each row. These Rongorongo tablets weren't mere decorations. They were the last whispers of a people who vanished before the first canoe ever touched the island's black sand. To understand the enigma of Rongorongo is to step into a linguistic labyrinth. Unlike Polynesian languages that read left to right, these glyphs use a system called reverse boustrophedon, lines that snake like an ox plowing a field, with characters flipping upside down at each turn. Only 26 tablets survive, many burned in missionary fires or lost to rot, their messages warped by time. But what's truly startling is that the script shares eerie similarities with motifs found on much older petroglyphs across the island, suggesting this wasn't just writing, but a sacred code stretching back to Rapa Nui's shadowy pre-Polynesian past. Who were these first scribes? Some researchers point to the long ears of Rapa Nui legend, a group described as having elongated earlobes who allegedly ruled before being overthrown by Polynesian short ears. Excavations at Vanapu revealed skeletons with cranial features more common in South America than Polynesia, fueling theories that these might have been descendants of pre-Columbian voyagers. Others argue the script's complexity hints at a lost priestly class, their knowledge so tightly guarded that even the Polynesian newcomers couldn't decipher it. The tablet's survival may be accidental, but their preservation is haunting. When European missionaries arrived in the 1860s, they found islanders rubbing the wood with turmeric and reciting chants, yet none could translate the glyphs. The last known Rongorongo expert, a man named Yorviako, died in 1866, taking the script's secrets to his grave. Modern attempts to decode it have yielded only fragments. One line might reference a solar eclipse in 1680, while another could list genealogies, but the full narrative remains locked away. Perhaps the most unsettling clue lies in the wood itself. Most tablets are carved from Toromiro, a tree extinct on the island since the 1800s. But radiocarbon dating places some tablets centuries older than Polynesian arrival, suggesting they were carved by hands that vanished long before the moai toppling began. Were these the chronicles of a culture that deforested itself to oblivion, or refugees from another island, their history reduced to glyphs no living person could read? The wood stays silent, its grooves worn smooth by fingers that traced meanings now lost to the waves. In the vast, wind-swept expanse of what is now Mauritania, where the Sahara stretches endlessly under a relentless sun, the Tichit tradition carved civilization from stone in one of the most improbable places on Earth. Between 1900 and 200 BC, long before camels crossed the desert, these resourceful people constructed hundreds of stone-walled villages atop rocky plateaus, their circular homes and granaries clustering like beads on a necklace along ancient trade routes. What's staggering isn't just their endurance in this harsh landscape, but their innovation. They engineered terraced fields to capture fleeting rainwater, transforming ephemeral oases into breadbaskets that fed thousands. Archaeologists piecing together their story face a puzzle written in drystone walls. At Dihar Tichit, the largest settlement, concentric rings of dwellings radiate outward from central livestock pens, suggesting a society where cattle were wealth and community was paramount. The granaries tell another tale, some large enough to hold harvests for lean years, their design so precise they kept grain safe from rodents and moisture. This wasn't just survival, it was foresight on a scale unseen elsewhere in West Africa at the time. But the Tichit people's true genius lay in adaptation. When core samples from nearby paleolakes reveal the climate began drying around 1500 BC, they didn't flee, they reinvented. Their later settlements shifted to higher ground, walls built thicker to deflect sand-laden winds. Pottery fragments show a dramatic shift from delicate, decorated bowls to sturdy, utilitarian vessels, less art, more function. Even their diet changed. Bone analyzers reveal a pivot from cattle to drought-resistant goats and wild grains like cram, whose thorny seeds still cling to the robes of modern Mauritanian nomads. Then, around 200 BC, the stones fall silent. The village is empty, but unlike other collapses, there's no evidence of invasion or violence. Instead, the desert itself seems to have advanced like a slow tide. Sand drifts choked their terraces, and wells that once tapped groundwater hit only dust. Yet the Tichit people didn't vanish without heirs. Their descendants likely became the Sonink, founders of the Khmer Empire, carrying forward traditions of stone masonry and collective farming. The most haunting legacy lies in what they left behind, not ruins, but a blueprint. Modern satellite imagery reveals their ancient field systems, invisible from the ground but unmistakable from above. Grids of stone lines guiding rainwater to crops, a technology now being revived by NGOs fighting desertification. Their empty villages stand as monuments not to failure, but to resilience, a reminder that even in the face of an encroaching desert, human ingenuity can leave footprints that outlast the sand. Beneath the shifting sands of Central Asia, where the Taklamakan Desert whispers secrets to the wind, the story of the Yuezhi unfolds like a half-buried scroll, fragmented, enigmatic, yet pulsating with hidden importance. These nomadic horsemen once grazed their herds across the lush grasslands of modern Gansu, trading jade along the Proto-Silk Road and commanding such respect that Chinese chronicles called them the Great Moon Tribe. Then, in a seismic shift around 176 BC, they vanished from China's northern frontiers, not by choice but under the hooves of the Xiongnu, a rival confederation whose brutal campaign left Yuezhi skulls fashioned into drinking cups for barbarian kings. What happened next would rewrite the map of Eurasia, but for centuries, historians could only trace their flight through cryptic Han Dynasty records and the glittering remnants they left behind. The Yuezhi's westward exodus became one of antiquity's most consequential odysseys. Chinese emissaries like Zhang Qian, venturing into the unknown in search of allies against the Xiongnu, eventually tracked them to the Oxus Valley, but the people he found were transformed. Decades of hardship had winnowed their numbers. Splinter groups like the lesser Yuezhi settled in the Tibetan foothills, while the main body carved a mercenary's path through Bactria, their cavalry skills now honed in the crucible of displacement. Here, in the wreckage of the Greek kingdoms left by Alexander's successors, they underwent a metamorphosis. Gone were the felt tents of the steppe. In their place rose a hybrid culture grafting Iranian Zoroastrianism with Hellenistic art and Buddhist spirituality. By the 1st century CE, they'd forged the Khmer Empire, a superpower straddling the Silk Road, minting coins that bore the face of King Kanishka alongside Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit inscriptions. What's staggering isn't just their rise, but how thoroughly their origins were obscured. The Yuezhi left no chronicles, their voice survives only through others. Chinese annals fixate on their defeat. Roman historians like Strabo called them Tocharians, conflating them with other nomads. Even their self-fashioned Kushan identity became a palimpsest, adopting the titles of Shayananashao, King of Kings, from Persian rivals while commissioning Buddhist statues with distinctly Greco-Roman features. Their greatest monument, the towering Kanishka Stupa in Peshawar, once held relics of the Buddha himself, yet its architecture fused Indian stupa designs with Hellenistic columns. The most tantalizing clues to their legacy lie in the genetic shadows they cast. In the fair-haired, blue-eyed mummies of the Tarim Basin, contemporaries of the early Yuezhi, some scholars see echoes of their lost eastern kin. More provocatively, the Tocharian languages spoken in oasis cities like Kucha until the 8th century CE share roots with Celtic and Germanic tongues, suggesting a prehistoric thread linking the Eurasian steppe to Europe's farthest edges. The Yuezhi didn't just disappear, they dissolved into the bloodstream of continents, their name forgotten even as their influence pulsed through trade routes connecting Rome to Chang'an. Today, their memory lingers in the most unexpected places. In the Gandharan Buddha's wavy drapery, a direct descendant of Greek sculpture, in the gold coins of Kanishka scattered from Mathura to the Caspian, in the very word China, likely derived from the Qin dynasty they once fled. Their story isn't one of erasure, but of radical reinvention, a testament to how the displaced can become the architects of worlds yet unborn. The Yuezhi whisper to us across the ages, identity isn't a fixed point but a river, carving new channels when the old ones run dry. Across these lost civilizations, from the Indus Valley's abandoned streets to the silent temples of the Maya, three ruthless patterns emerge: climate's fickleness, the crush of invasion, and the slow bleed of resource depletion. The Mocha's canals ran dry under El Niño's wrath, the Hittites starved when drought choked their fields, and the Garamontes drank their aquifers to dust. Yet history's graveyard is also littered with societies that misread their own fragility. The Mycenaeans, whose rigid bureaucracy snapped under pressure, or the Easter Islanders, wrongly blamed for self-destruction when outsiders shattered their world. What haunts isn't just their endings, but how many saw collapse coming. The Maya carved drought prophecies in stone, the Greenland Norse ignored Inuit fishing techniques that might have saved them, and the Cahokians built palisades against neighbors turned enemies by shrinking harvest. Their ruins whisper a warning we're now decoding with LiDAR and soil cores. Civilizations rarely die from single catastrophes, but from cascading failures, environmental stress fracturing social contracts, elites clinging to power as systems unravel. Yet there's hope in their shadows. Modern cities are learning from the Khmer's water mismanagement, adopting ancient Nabatean rainwater capture in drought zones. Archaeobotanists resurrect lost crops like the Tichit people's drought-resistant grains, while indigenous fire practices once labeled primitive now shield forests from megafires. The difference this time, we hold something the Moch or the Harappans lacked: a planetary-scale memory, able to read the warnings etched in 30 centuries of ruins. So let these vanished worlds be more than cautionary tales. Step outside and trace the contours of your own landscape, the overgrown foundation of a mill, the arrowhead in a freshly plowed field. Every place has its mysteries waiting underfoot, reminders that history isn't just something we study, but something we stand upon. If you've marveled at these lost chapters, imagine what stories still lie buried. Hit subscribe and let's keep unearthing humanity's greatest puzzles together, because the next civilization that vanishes could be one whose ruins we're building right now.